נפתח בכמה דברים קצרים בעניין הפסח. We'll begin with a few words regarding Pesach, practical information. This year, Erev Pesach hal liot b'Shabbat. That means, first of all, B'dikat Hametz is therefore done not or Yud Daled, but or Yod Gimel. In other words, Thursday night. We check the house, all places where Hametz is likely to have been, where Hametz is likely to have been placed or have reached for whatever reason. With small children in the house, one never knows where it might reach, so basically you have to check almost everything. And you put it all aside, and the next morning, because we cannot burn Hametz on Shabbat, which is Yud Daled, so we do it on Friday morning, which is Yod Gimel. And because we have Shabbat coming up, most people probably will want to eat Hametz, the first two meals of Shabbat, Leil Shabbat, Leil Yud Daled, and Yud Daled in the morning. Shaharit, so that's Shaharit Shel Shabbat. Simple thing to do is not to buy too much, not to have too much Hametz on hand. Enough for the Seudah, for the morning, for the evening, for the morning. Some people prefer to buy, to use pitot, even if they don't always do so during the year, because it produces fewer crumbs. To tell you the truth, I don't understand that rationale, because perurim betalim hemelehem, and most people will also find a broom, and to sweep up a few crumbs is not an issue, but kol echad lefi ratzono. So if you prefer pitot, that's fine. If you prefer challah, that's also fine. Sof zaman achilat hametz b'Shabbat b'boker, not this coming Shabbat, but one following, which is Yud Daled b'Nisan, is 10:30. In some luchot, in some places, Dapei Meida, etc., you will find that it says 10:17 or something like that. That's not exactly so, but it's not a huge difference either. But okay, but it might make a difference to some people, because it's Shabbat morning, people daven, come back, they want to sit down and eat without rushing. So you should know the Sof Zaman Achilat Hametz is exactly 10:30, or in fact I think it's actually in Yerushalayim or Gush Etzion it's 10:31. All right, Seder. You have to finish eating it by that time.
All over the country, Rabbi? Even somebody watching in the Golan, it would be the same?
It would be a 1 or 2 minute difference. So if we say 10:30, that's fine. That's precise enough. What do you do with Hametz that you have left over? First of all, you should try and have as little left over as possible. So certainly real Hametz, such as bread, crackers, soup nuts, etc., etc., you should try and be rid of all that well before Shabbat, before you're done, so you don't have to deal with it. Whatever might be left by that time, you have 1 hour from that point onwards till 11:30 to be rid of it. How can you be rid of it? There are two possible things you can do on being Shabbat. You can either break up the Hametz, let's say it's bread, into small pieces and flush it down the toilet. That's possible, but don't small pieces so you don't end up blocking the toilet. It's the last thing you're going to need on Yud Daled b'Nisan, on Shabbat. Okay. The other possibility, which I think is even more practical, is to take it out to the general rubbish bin, garbage can, trash can, whatever you want to call it. So you have one in the chaser in the street. If you can get there without being metaltel, so you take it there. If not, you can also put it in your own rubbish, your own personal rubbish bag, and pour a little bleach or some such substance over it, so it's nifsal me'achilat kelev. You don't have to pour a bottle, just a little bit to make it pasul nifsal me'achilat kelev vaday. Sudat Shabbat. So we said we have Leil Shabbat, where you can eat hametz, of course. The same is true for Shabbat morning, but you have to finish by the time that we mentioned. Some people, because of the time factor, they begin the meal with bread and some salatim, some afuna and tahina and whatever it might be, whatever you like. For those of you who don't know, afuna is hummus, and then set that aside, and you can eat the rest of your meal. Can be whatever else you may want: chicken, rice, vegetables, fruit, whatever it might be. In other words, the first part of the meal is with the chametz, and the second part of the meal is without the chametz. Some people even say birkat hamazon after that first smaller course, and then afterwards they may wait a while, they may not wait a while. It makes no difference really, and you can eat whatever you like with the regular brachot required for those foodstuffs. Su'udah Shalishith. You cannot eat hametz from 10:30 onwards, nor can you eat matzah. It says in the Talmud Yerushalmi, halakha pesuka lechol hadeot, asur le'echol matzah be'erev Pesach. You're not allowed to eat matzah erev Pesach. However, this refers to regular plain matzah, the kind of matzah that you can eat at night to be yotzei v'chovah. But if you take matzah, and it doesn't matter right now whether it's hard matzah or soft matzah, you take matzah and you cook it. How would you cook it? Mashal, you could put it inside a pot of hot chicken soup and soak it there for a few minutes. That's called, once it's kolet hata'am shel hamarak, once it has absorbed the flavor of the soup, it is considered mevushal, and it's no longer matzah she'asura lechol b'Pesach. This is muskam. This is agreed to by essentially all the poskim. The same is also true of matzah meturenet, fried matzah. How does that work? You can take matzah. I would suggest you dip it in a little bit of egg also, not just oil, and fry it in a frying pan. Better probably with a fair amount of oil, not just a tiny drop. And that too is no longer matzah yotzin ba'yadeh hova. It's not regular matzah any longer, and that is mutar to eat on Erev Pesach. So that can be eaten for Su'udah Shlishit.
Can you do that on Shabbat?
You can't. You can eat it on Shabbat. You can't make it on Shabbat. You can't fry it on Shabbat. Obviously not. You can't prepare it on Shabbat. You have to do that the day before, like anything else that you prepare for Shabbat. But you can plan to eat such cooked or fried matzah for Su'udah Shlishit on Erev Pesach.
If you put the matzah inside of the soup on the Shabbat, wouldn't that make it okay?
Would that make it okay?
Yeah.
In Leil Shabbat, you don't have to do that, Bichlal.
No, in order so you'll have it for Su'udah Shlishit.
You could do that as well.
What about egg matzah?
If egg, I'm not sure what you mean when you say egg matzah. I'm not sure what's in it. Different companies, different places make it differently. I don't know what's in there. If it's matzah ashira, rov kechol harishonim agree that matzah ashira is mutar be'erev Pesach, and for Mashal Su'udah Shlishit. So what is matzah ashira? If you make matzah instead of with water, with wine, with fruit juice, with oil, okay, but no water, not a drop of water, no water whatsoever. You have to make sure there's absolutely no water, not in the bowl and not on your hands and not on any other utensils. But if you use only fruit juices wine, grape juice, and here I'll mention eggs because Rashi omnam istapek b'chach. Rashi was not certain that it's mutar to make matzah just with eggs instead of water, and is that considered matzah ashira or not? But almost all the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Tam, his grandson, and the Ravya, and Rosh, למעשה אפשר לומר שכולם מסכימים כמעט. It's mutar to have that's real egg matzah. If you do that, that's also Seder. That's matzah ashira. You can't eat that at night and let us Seder to be a Seder chova.
The average commercially sold egg matzah doesn't fit the bill.
I don't know. I just don't know how it's made. Therefore I cannot say. Once someone showed me such a product and allowed me to taste it, and I'll be honest, it wasn't worth the eating. So I'm not sure I can recommend it. But I don't know. I don't remember what company it was right now. I don't know. But it didn't strike me as very enticing. So I think you can probably make a better version by yourself at home, if that's what you want to do. Another possibility is you don't absolutely have to have matzah or bread. Bread obviously not, but not something which is considered hamuthi for Suda Shadishith. You can be mistapek, you can make do with something which is mezonot. One idea some people have is to have some chicken soup with knedlach, with kuftaot. It's made of matzah meal, but it's not matzah. אי אפשר לצאת, זה לא נחשב מצה, גם אם זה טעם מצה באמת. So you're allowed to have soup with a lot of knedlach inside if that's what you like.
But wouldn't that be not melechatchila as far as Sudash Lashit? Because Sudash Lashit you generally should have bread. Generally
yes, but obviously this situation is an unusual situation where you don't have very many options. There's even an opinion that on such a day, such an Erev Shabbat as this, you not even chayav to have a Sudash Lashit. So, but you can definitely, but halacha, you should eat Sudash Lashit, but you can eat other foodstuffs as we mentioned, and that's on Erev Shabbat Erev Pesach shehal yod b'Shabbat. That is perfectly acceptable. Another few halachot I will mention to do with Leila Seder.
Okay, just ask about what about eating both of the day meals before 10:30? Just waking up early, eating the first meal at 8 o'clock, and then the second at 10 o'clock.
It's an interesting question. Everyone understand the question? Can you get up early, have Seudah Shniya, the first meal of the day on Shabbat, Erev Pesach, let's say at 7? Or no, you couldn't do it at 7 now, it wouldn't work out. 8, I don't know, maybe 8:30, 9, and then have another meal 2 hours later or something.
Before 10.
Or well, it would have to be before 10:30. So it's very, first of all, it would be very tight in terms of time.
And would there not be a good reason to pater Sutra Lagamre, being that we wouldn't even be here, we'd be in our bias?
To be patur from?
We wouldn't be here. We'd be on our bias with the korban.
If we were busy with Korban Pesach, then you would be correct, I imagine. Even though then too you could have a bite or something. Wherever.
If we're waiting outside.
B'yad Harabait, whatever. I'm sure that before Azman there will be people who will set up stalls and they'll be selling snacks for people waiting in line for the Korban. I'm sure this will become an industry in itself. But you're right, Erev Pesach would look different if we had a Korban Pesach.
Can you remind me what knedlach, just to make sure I understand?
Matzah balls.
Matzah balls, okay.
In Yiddish they're called knedlach. In Hebrew they're called kuftaot. English they're called matzah balls.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
The 2 meals before 10:30.
There are 2 mitzvot min Torah that we are able and commanded to perform b'leila seder, that we're able to perform today. There's also a third one which we're unable at this time to perform. The third one is what we just discussed now, Korban Pesach. The 2 that we are able to perform is Achilat Matzah and Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. Both of these are mitzvot aseh min Torah. How much matzah must you eat? 1 Kazait. How much is a Kazait? 3 cc. How much is 3 cc? Do you have a measuring cup here? A spoon? 3 cc is a very small amount, so just to show people. Imagine the average olive that you can buy in the store nowadays, not a very large one, an average olive. That is the volume that is referred to as a Kazait, and in practice that is 3 cc. There are different types of olives. The kind of olive that Hazal had in mind is a relatively small variety of olive, normally referred to nowadays.
2.5 and 5.
All right, so something between, the volume is somewhere between these two, okay? Not very large in volume. We're talking about a very small amount. In other words, and let's take an average olive would fit in here nicely. So you want to be very machmir, you can say 5 cc, but the truth is that's not true. It's not. The truth is what Chazal were referring to, what is normally referred to today as zaif suri or suri, which is a small, relatively small size olive. They range in size from 2.5 to 3.5 cc, so the average is 3. The next variety of olive that was and is common in Eretz Yisrael averages 5 cc. So must be very machmir, 5 cc. But the truth is, 3 cc is a Kazait. I'm not giving it to you in weight, because a Kazait is a volume and not a weight. Why did the Geonim and the Rambam and others describe these things in terms of weight? To make it simple for people to measure. If you take a cup of water and they tell you if you place 2 particular coins, a particular type of coin, 2 of them, put them in a full cup of water, it will displace a certain amount of water, and that amount of water that is displaced is a reve'ith or a kazait or whatever it might be, depending what they're trying to describe. It's simply a way of making it easier for people to estimate. But it's a volume, and it's a very simple thing to wrap your head around. And the volume of an olive is the volume of an olive. An average, now most Rabbanim will say, no, we go by weight. And they will tell you how much is a Kazait, 27 grams. That's what many Rabbanim will say. Some will say 56, but all right, some will say 27 grams. How much is a standard machine matzah today in weight? 30 grams. So it's almost an entire matzah. That's, in their view, a Kazait, which is a very interesting position. I've never seen an olive of that size, and I know that I tried many years ago. I experimented. I took a machine matzah and I ground it up finely, and its volume was more than an average egg. An average egg is several times more than an olive, several times, without being more specific. Now, and it says explicitly in the Talmud, the Masechet Yomah, that Beth HaBli'ah Mahazik Kazait. In other words, a normal person in one swallows about, it can be a little bit more, but not a tremendous amount more. If you try and swallow the volume of an egg in one swallow, I very much suspect that you will spend Pesach in the hospital. And I would not recommend it. You may choke. So what I say a Kazait is 3 cc because that's the material, that's the reality you see before us. People don't understand, but it's nevertheless a fact, that in all likelihood Rashi never saw an olive. In all likelihood Rabbeinu Tam never saw an olive. We know this because we have certain Baalei Tosafot who write explicitly that when I was in Europe, when I was in Germany, in Ashkenaz, I wasn't sure about how much a Kazait was, and we thought maybe it was a half an egg or a third of an egg, or more. We weren't sure. Now that I came to Yerushalayim, because there were such Chachamim who managed to come to Yerushalayim, now I see that it's a great deal less than what we imagined. The Rav Yah did not see an olive. How do I know? Because he says, we don't know what the Shiur of the Kazait is, and therefore we have to be machmir. And based on the sugyot, we can estimate that if it's half an egg, it's vadai more than a kazait. Well, that's true. Half an egg is definitely more than a kazait, but it's a whole lot more than a kazait. Because olives do not grow everywhere in nature. Olives actually are very specific. They grow along the edges of the Mediterranean Sea, like Eretz Yisrael, Turkey, Italy, Greece, Spain, the largest producer of olives in the world today, and olive oil is Spain. But there's very few other areas, basically no place, except for, actually interestingly, South Australia. In the state of South Australia, there is possible to grow olives reasonably successfully. But the truth is they do not really take anywhere else. So in countries in Northern and Western Europe, which were far away from places where olives were cultivated, people did not see olives. They saw occasionally perhaps a little bit of olive oil, which was very expensive. Just as it was very expensive in Bavel, for the very same reason, because olives don't grow in Bavel, not in Germany, they don't grow in Bavel. Dates grow wonderfully in Bavel. Dates were the most important crop, perhaps after wheat and barley in Bavel. But olives did not grow in Bavel. You don't have to take my word for it. You can take Herodotus' word for it. The ancient Greek historian Herodotus writes this explicitly. he visited many countries in the world, and he says that Bavel is very, very good for producing grain, for wheat and barley, etc., but that does not produce olives. And he, being a Greek, olives are very important to him. So he says, this is a great place for growing wheat, not a great place for growing olives, and it's a fact. And that's why we find in Masechet Shabbat, in the Tosefta and the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, explicitly that talking about Ner Shabbat. So Rabbi Tarfon says, "En modlikim ela b'shemen zayit bilevav." You only like Shabbat candles with olive oil because it lights the brightest or cleanest or whatever. Okay. So immediately Rabbi Yohanan ben Nuri Omed al Raglo stands up and says, but what about the people of Bagola and in Bavel who don't have Shemen Zayit? They have Shemen Shum Shemin or Shemen Paku'oth or something else. So we see from that they didn't have olive oil. It was not common. It was very expensive. It was not common. In medieval Europe, olive oil was very rare and it was used mainly by pharmacists for producing medicines or mixtures, creams or whatever. So maybe Rashi saw some olive oil once, maybe, probably not. But someone like Rambam or the Rashba or the Ritba or the Ramban who lived in countries where there were plenty of olives, they saw olives and they never had a safek what the size of an olive was. So there are people who say that a Kazait is 27 grams. When I say people, I mean all the Rabbanim who say they're not many Rabbanim who are not being Mahamir, because that's not Shiur Chazonish. That's Rabbi Chaim Le'ekiv Yachol, 27 grams. That's the whole Matzah, basically. To claim that's a Kazait is really unusual, I would say. In my estimation, a Kazait of a machine Matzah is 1/9 of a machine Matzah. You take a machine matzah and you break it into 3 strips, as equal as you can make them, shall we say, and you take one of those thirds and you divide it into 3 pieces. One of those pieces, which is 1/9 of the machine matzah, in my view is more than a kazait. So that's how I suggest you estimate if you need to. Basically, a kazait is a small bite. In simple words, a small bite, that's a kazait. So.
And if we're talking about the thin matzah shmura, then it's even less than the size of the 1/9.
Well, the size there is not uniform. It varies. It's hard to know, but it's more dense also.
But it's less space-wise because it's more dense. I mean, there's less horizontal space.
It's not a very large piece. It's roughly the same size, because the truth is the you do not have to estimate the volume without the air pocket, so to speak. You don't have to. So we understand from Masechet Hala talking about such things. You estimate the volume as you see it. So it doesn't make a huge difference if it's a machine matzah or a handmade hard dry matzah. Either way, we're talking about it one small bite. That's what you have to eat. You want to eat more? B'vakasha. Gesundheit. You want me to translate that too? Gesundheit, you know what that means?
I was somehow thinking Kanedalach might have been like the soup nuts or something.
No, those are called mandalach.
Right, okay.
And that means that the most important mitzvah, on the one hand, on the other hand, perhaps the most difficult to properly perform, is Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that is the mitzvah of the Haggadah, and to understand and to discuss it in an intelligent manner with whoever is with you at the table. That is the most important mitzvah of the evening, because maror is bazman hazeh, the present time without a korban, is midivrei sofarim. So arba kosot, also midivrei sofarim, not min haTorah. Important, but not min haTorah. Those are some of the basic things to do with the Seder. Another thing I'll mention, there is more than one shita amongst the Geonim and amongst the Rishonim about what bracha you say or do not say on the 4 arba kosot, the 4 cups of wine. The opinion of 1 or 2 Geonim only, but a number of Rishonim, such as the Rosh, is that you make a bracha borei pri hagafen on the first course, which is Kiddush. On the second course, you do not say borei pri hagafen. And on the third, you make a bracha because it's the kosher bracha, the cup of wine that is drunk with after Birkat HaMazon. And you don't make a bracha borei pri hagafen on the course of Revi'i or Hamishi, if you're noheg course Hamishi, which is obviously not a chova. And then after the end, you say ala gefen, the bracha harona, on all those kosot. I won't go here into the whole discussion amongst the Rishonim. That's the view of 1 or 2 Geonim and some Rishonim. The view of almost all the Geonim, namely Halachot Gedolot, Rav Sharira Gaon, Rav Hai Gaon, Rav Amram Gaon, Rav Natronai Gaon, and others that I do not recall offhand, and the Shita of the Rif, and the Shita of the Rambam, and the Minhag of the Ashkenazim, despite the fact that the Rosh thought otherwise. The Rosh was being mahadesh something, because the ancient Minhag of the Ashkenazim is, as I'm about to say, which is that each course requires its own baracha, borei pri hagafen. Okay? There are all kinds of questions why, hadath or not, bikata ne'enin, lama, but that discussion is a very lengthy one, a very interesting discussion, a very interesting sugya, but it's not for now. Lama'aseh, I think that it's correct, and it's obviously the opinion of Rov Kechol HaKadmonim, almost all the early sources, is to say a bracha on each cup, on each kos of the arba kosot, to say borei pri hagafen. I don't think you have to say a bracha harona after any of them, except for at the end. But there are some opinions, the Ra'avan and the Rid, who agree with that logic that each course requires its own baracha, because the Talmud states explicitly that each cup is a mitzvah bifnei asma ben pen nafsha. So each, if they say therefore, if each course is a bracha in its own right, it requires its own bracha. Think about the following: if you drink a cup of wine in a meal without a special bracha, without borei pri hagafen, who's to know that you're drinking it because it's arba kosot? Maybe you're drinking wine because you want to drink wine. What I just said now is not my svara. The Rosh himself says this in another context. The Rosh says, we know that you can make kiddush leil Shabbat or leil Yom Tov also. You can make kiddush on path, on bread, and not on wine, correct? either because you don't like wine or you're allergic to wine, or because you prefer the bread. So you can make kiddush ler Shabbat, you can make kiddush ala path. Halacha mekubelet. There are those, yesh cholkim, Rabbeinu Tam lo yiskim, aval that's the halacha. You can make kiddush ala path, ler Shabbat. What about in the morning? Lichora, you should be able to do the same thing in the morning. Kol sheken, it's not really kiddush, it's just PRE-PASSOVER, but there's no PRE-PASSOVER, there's no wine, or you don't want to drink wine. So what would you do? You would say hamothi. That's all you can say. You can always add psukim before, but that's not kiddush. Saying psukim is a very nice and important thing, but it's not kiddush. Kiddush is the bracha that we say at night, and preceded by the PRE-PASSOVER. In the morning there's only PRE-PASSOVER, or if no wine, then bread. If bread, hamothi lechamin haaretz. The Rosh says, if you just sit down to your meal and say hamothi, and that's your kiddush, who's to know that you said kiddush? It just looks like you're sitting down to a meal and you're saying hamothi. So therefore, the Rosh says, and it's brought in the Shulchan Aruch as well, that b'Shabbat, b'Shaharith, if you have no wine, or you don't want it, you can't drink wine, you can make kiddush on shechar, on beer, or cider, because that would be nikar. In other words, the idea there has to be nikar. There has to be nikar that you're saying kiddush, something special, different, that you're doing something different on Shabbat morning that you wouldn't do on a Tuesday morning. Because on Tuesday morning also you sit down to breakfast, you say amotzi. So as ma ishna, b'mei nikar shezeh Shabbat. There's no indication at all that it's Shabbat. That's what the Rosh says with regards to kiddush. Shabbat b'boker, if you don't have wine or you don't want to use wine, that it's better to do kiddush al shechar rather than on bread, so that it will be nikar that you make kiddush. The same you can say about arba kosot b'leil Seder. If you don't say a special bracha for each one, who's to say it's arba kosot? Maybe you're just drinking wine because you like drinking wine, or you're thirsty, or because you're chas v'shalom a drunkard, or mi yodea ma. But it doesn't look like you're drinking arba kosot necessarily. So there are these different opinions, but the opinion of almost all the ancient authorities, and many of the Rishonim as well, including the Rambam, is each course requires its own bracha. But, and I said there are a few Rishonim, like the Ravan and the Reed, who say that even therefore, because each is a separate thing, it also requires a bracha achrona. So you say PRE-PASSOVER from before each course, and you say alagefen after each course. It's also possible. Yesh b'zeh higayon. Makes some sense, but I don't think it's I wouldn't suggest that, because en poiseh hadat, you know you're going to drink again more, so that's exactly the kusha. People say, well, you know you're going to drink more, so why say PRE-PASSOVER on the second cup? The answer is because it has to have a ma'amad mishal atzmo. So each course requires its own bracha. You don't have to drink wine if you don't like wine. You can drink grape juice, or you can mix the wine with grape juice. You can also dilute the wine with water, as long as it still has a winey taste to it. Yesh bo ta'am yain, it's okay. You can also drink, doesn't have to be dry wine, it can be sweet wine. Yen konditon, Yerushalmi says mufurash is mutar, is acceptable, which is wine sweetened with honey and spices and what have you. So anything that's clearly wine and you like it, go for it. It's fine. You don't have to drink wine that you don't enjoy, or that you don't like, or that makes you tipsy or something. Some people are very sensitive. They drink a cup of wine and they haven't eaten before, so that it goes straight to their head. So you can be more careful. First of all, that's number one. Number two, how much you have to drink. You have to drink rov kos. Rov, the majority of a cup, which holds a revi'ith. A revi'ith is at most 80 cc. Really, it's about 75. But let's just say let's say 80 cc. It's very little. How much is 80 cc? It's I don't know. Do you have a measuring cup here? I can show you. It's considerably less than a standard one of these standard disposable cups. As we'll see in a moment.
It's up to 90.
That is
90.
90?
90.
Okay, very good. All right, so this is rather small, and this is 90 cc. So that's more than a revi'ith, and you have to drink a majority of this amount. So just over half of 80 is just over 40, 45 cc. It's not very much. Okay, very good. That's all. You don't have to have therefore a huge glass. You don't have to fill it up. You can choose something smaller, and you don't have to. You certainly should not get drunk.
How about white wine?
If a person, there is a ma'ala. Generally, it's considered there is a ma'ala is preferable to have red wine, but if a person prefers white wine, or the white wine is a very expensive, upmarket wine, and the red wine that you have is simple fare, then you can go for that. You can use the white wine as well.
About the wine, Rabbeinu Haman writes that if you don't put water in it, it's not valid, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right. However, that was how wine. I'm not saying you shouldn't add water to the wine. I think it's a very good idea, in fact. But you don't have to nowadays, because we do drink wine undiluted. We're used to drinking wine that way. In fact, most people are not used to drinking wine diluted at all. In ancient times, it was the other way around. People did not drink wine neat without adding water to it. It just wasn't done. So it was considered not really ra'ui l'shtiyah, was considered too strong and not undesirable. For us, it depends on what you're used to. If you're used to adding water, add water. You're not used to, you don't like it, don't do it. Okay? Or you can mix it with grape juice, as I said, or something else.
So we mentioned red and white. I have a cousin who doesn't drink red wine, but she does like rosé. Do we even know
Fine.
what rosé?
I know what rosé is, and that's also fine. So I also think rosé qualifies as red.
Okay.
Okay? The Seder. Now, I wanted to.
Can I just ask about
Sure.
Sudas from before?
Yes.
About the option of eating 2 meals early in the morning before 10:30 with bread.
Yes, you asked about yes. Regarding that question, the problem is, according to the halachot gedolot, you don't have to separate the 3 meals and spread them out throughout the day. You can have them all squeezed together, basically. You can have a meal at night, and in the morning have a meal, say Birkat Hamazon, immediately have another meal. Say Hamotzi again, etc. And that qualifies as Shalosh Seudot. So says the halachot gedolot. Rambam clearly does not say so. Rambam clearly says the opposite. You have Rambam po Ilchot Shabbat? Okay. Toda rabba. פרק הלכות שבת, פרק 30 אני חושב. הלכת טף, פרק 30 הלכת טף. חייב אדם לאכול 3 סעודות בשבת. Person must eat 3 meals on Shabbat, and Rambam goes on to say explicitly, אחת ערבית, ואחת שחרית, ואחת במנחה. Minha, by the way, can you pass me Perush Rambam על המשנה פה, זרעים? Rambam says in his Perush on the Mishnah, the word minha normally refers to the following time of day. The Mishnah states in the beginning of Masechet Shabbat, "Lo yeshev adam lifnei asapar samuch lamincha ad sheyitpalel." A person should not get involved in certain types of activities, such as getting themselves a haircut, which is something that may take longer than expected. La mincha. Now, what is this time called mincha? Samuch la mincha. What is this time? Rashi says, I'm sorry, not Rashi, Rambam says, is it here? No, it's not here. It's in Masechet Berachot. Yes, I'm sorry. The beginning of Perek in Masechet Berachot, Tefilat HaShahar ad Hasot, Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad Arba Sha'ot, Tefilat HaMincha ad Ha'erev, Rabbi Yehuda Omer ad Plag v'Mincha. So it talks about Plag v'Mincha, half of the Mincha. So what time of day is being referred to? Rambam explains. The word Palag, we know, means half. In Aramaic, Hasi is Palga. Palag HaMincha is half of the Mincha. What is Mincha? Rambam says, Shem nofel al et me'ituthe hayom v'hu kashenishar bayom sha'atayim u'behesa zmaniyot. In other words, the word minha doesn't mean a type of tefillah or a specific tefillah during the day. The word minha refers to a time of day. What time of day is that? When there are 2.5 sha'ot zmaniyot left, which means mid-afternoon. So a hypothetical day of 6 to 6, sunrise at 6 a.m., sunset at 6 p.m., which is not far from the current situation without the extra changing of the clock that we had recently. This time of year, that's the hypothetical day, 6 to 6. So minha, the time referred to as minha, is 3:30 p.m., 2.5 hours before sunset. And because there is a tefillah that is done, that is recited at that time, that tefillah is called tefillat minha. And that's what Rambam says, when nikret ha-tefillah ha-shniya, minha lefi she'tehilat zmana b'otho eth. In other words, tefillat minha is called tefillat minha because of that time of the day when it is recited. Minha is therefore mid-afternoon. So when Rambam says here in Chof Shabbat that you have to eat the third meal of the Shalosh Sudot b'minha, I think Rambam means clearly minha katana, what we call minha katana. In other words, 2.5 hours. That from that time, 2.5 hours roughly, could be roughly, for argument's sake, it could be 3 hours also, but roughly around that time till the end of the day. That's when Seudah Shlishit should be eaten. What I just said to you now is not what all Rabbanim will tell you, because I know for a fact that many Rabbanim will tell you that Seudah Shlishit you may eat, even according to what Rambam says, that they have to be different times of the day, not crammed together, that you can eat Seudah Shlishit mizman mincha gedola ve'elach, which is half an hour after hasot, half an hour after midday. I don't think that's correct. If you're going according to what Rambam says here, mincha means mincha. Mincha is not the middle of the day. Mincha is the latter quarter of the day. So that's with regards to that. So it's not clear that it's possible to really be samech on what the Bahag says regarding cramming the Sudot together. It makes more sense that they should be spread out, as Rambam writes, I think. So that's with regards to that.
There's no problem that I'm having the Seudah too close, because in this case it's Yom Tov also, the following night.
So the answer to that's a good point, it's a valid point, because the Mishnah also states in Masechet Pesachim, Erev Pesachim lo yochal adam samuch lemincha ad shetechshach. In other words, you should enter Pesach and the Seder when you have an appetite, when you are hungry, and not having eaten not so long ago. So you have Seudah Shlishit, but you don't eat very much. That's also possible. Once it's possible not to eat as much as you might want to eat. You have less than you would normally eat, and do it as long before you can, before the Seder. So don't do it at 6 p.m. Do it at 3 p.m., 4 p.m., something like that.
Be after Mincha Ketana.
After the Tefillah?
No, Mincha Ketana.
But after is Mincha Ketana. So that's what I'm saying. If it's approximately Mincha Ketana, might be something like. Now it's about 4:15, Kazait. So it's sometime like 4:30. That's a reasonable time. I want to mention something else to do with Pesach, and that is, we spoke about various aspects of Erev Pesach and Leila Seder. why did Hazal state that you must stop eating hametz by sof arba sha'ot, by the end of 4 hours, Erev Pesach in the morning, and be rid of it by the end of 5 hours? Because it is asur min haTorah to have to eat hametz Erev Pesach on Yud Daled before Chag HaMatzot begins, which is from the Leil Tethvav, from the beginning of the 15th in the evening. But already at midday, it's asur to eat Matzah, to eat hametz. To eat hametz Erev Pesach from midday is asur min haTorah. Where do we learn this from? So in the Talmud Bavli Lamashal, Daf Daled, Daf Hey, it says, Daled Amud Bet, it says, Tanan Hatham, it says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir Omer, Ochelim Kol Hamesh, V'sorofim B'tchilat Shesh. You're allowed to eat during the 5th hour, according to Rabbi Meir, and during that 6th hour, the 1 hour before midday, you have to get rid of the hametz. Sorfim, burning, refers to not on Shabbat, obviously. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Ochelim kol arba, tolim kol hamesh, v'sorofim kol b'tchilat shesh. So you may eat till the end of the 4th. You get rid of it till the end of the 5th hour. And by the beginning of the 6th hour, you have to be finished with the hametz. The chulei alama miha hametz mishesh sha'ot u'lemala asur minalan. In other words, everyone agrees that from 6 hours, in other words, midday onwards, it's asur. How do we know this? But it doesn't say so explicitly in so many words in the Torah. The Talmud brings the pasuk, Shiv'ath yomim, se'or lo yinaseh bevatechem. For 7 days, you may not have se'or, which is starter or sourdough in your possession, from which you make hametz in the traditional manner. Keep in mind that commercial yeast that is used often nowadays was only invented about, I think, less than 300 years ago. And it says, another pasuk states, Ach v'yom harishon tashbithu se'or mibatechem. So on the one hand it says, for 7 days, lichora, 7 days means from the beginning of Chag HaMatzot, from the 15th. So from the night of Leil Seder, you're not allowed to have se'or, to have sourdough in your possession. Se'or, by the way, is the same word as sour. And the Torah also says, Bayom harishon tashbithu se'or mibatechem. On the first day, mashma, during the course of the first day, you have to get rid of the se'or in your home. So how can that be? If it says 7 days, that means 7 whole days. And if then it says on the first day, that means it wasn't 7 whole days. HaKesad l'rabot arba'asa l'vi'ur. That means that the mitzvah of bi'ur, of getting rid of the hametz, and se'or is just one type of hametz. In other words, se'or is the sourdough, the starter with which you begin to prepare the dough, and then you make a loaf of bread and you bake it, and that's called hametz. But they're the same halachic status, se'or and hametz. So l'rabot arba'asa l'vi'ur. So during the day of the 14th, Erev Pesach, you have to get rid of the hametz. So that means not at the beginning of the day. So at what point in the day? So the Talmud discusses this, and it goes on to say, I will we'll get straight to the end of the sugya. It says, Ach hilek. Now the pasuk says, Ach b'yom harishon. The word Ach is a mi'ut. In other words, the meaning of the word is, however, or nevertheless, or something like that, depending on the context. In terms of time, it lessens the time involved. So, Ach b'yom harishon, at some point during, I'm sorry, I need a Mishnah again, the Rambam. At some point during the 14th, Yud Daled, you have to get rid of the hametz. Okay, but at what point? In the morning, midday, afternoon? It's unclear. Rambam says, in his Perush on the Mishnah, So this is Perek Rishon, Halacha Dalet. In Masechet Pesachim, and Rambam says, "Umichlal haremazim lezeh haklal." What klal? The klal that minat Torah hametz must be gone, and also you may not eat hametz mitchilat shesh, from midday on Yud Dalet. Rambam says, "Michlal haremazim lezeh haklal hamekubal." Mekubal means it's Kabbalah. Klomar shebiur hametz v'miksath. In other words, in the middle of Yom 14, hu omro yithaleh lo tishahet al hametz dam zivhi. In other words, you're not allowed to have hametz in your possession when you are involved in the shechita of the Korban Pesach, which is from Chasot Hayom onwards, on Yud Dalet. Uva beKabbalah shezeh hamiksath mitchilat sha'a shvi'ith, from the beginning of the 7th hour. In other words, that you may not have hametz in your possession, nor may you eat hametz from midday onwards. So what does Rambam just say? Ba beKabbalah shezeh hamiksath mitchilat sha'a shvi'ith. Kabbalah means it's a perush mekubal. In other words, a tradition. But I want you to listen to what Rashi writes here. Rashi says something, I think, quite different. The Talmud says that we learn from the word hilek, which means that part of the day is mutar and part of the day is asur. Right? Ach hilek et hayom. There's a part of the day when it's mutar still to have chametz, and there's a part of the day when it's asur to have chametz. Rashi says, achin urakin mi'utin. These words, ach and rak, come to limit something, or condense something. Alma miksat hayom mutar or miksato asur. From this we understand that when the Torah says, ach bayom harishon tashbithu so'im batechem. From this we understand the Torah means that part of that day, Yud Dalet, is asur, bechametz, and part of that day is mutar. Rashi says, now, ume'ata, and therefore, yesh lanu lehalek hasyo le'isur, wa hasyo leheter. Lo Kabbalah. Lanu. In other words, we understand, we infer from what the Torah said, that seeing that we understand from the Torah that there's part of the day is asur and part of the day is mutar, and there's no clear indication in the Torah how much is each part of this day. Rashi says, yesh lanu lehalek, and it's logical to say that it should be half-half. Lehalek hasyo le'isur, hasyo leheter. I think this Rashi is extremely important. In fact, I think this Rashi explains the essence of Torah She'Ba'al Peh. According to what Rambam writes in his Pirush on the Mishnah, we know that Mihasot Hayom on Yud Dalet, from the midday on the 14th of Nisan, you're not allowed to have chametz, not allowed to eat or possess chametz. That's a Kabbalah, that's a Perush Mekubal, it's a tradition that we received. But we were passive in this process. We received information. That's it. According to Rashi, Am Yisrael created this halacha as much as the Torah created this halacha. The Torah indicated to you, Ach b'yom harishon tashbithu. So at some point on this first, which is being referred to as the first day, which is Erev Pesach, Yod Dalet, you have to be rid of the hametz. But it didn't actually specify at what point during the day. It's an unusual thing because most mitzvot, if they pertain to a certain day, the zman begins at the beginning of the day, which is in the evening. So you would think you should do it already. Belel Yud Dalet. You might think that if it says the first day and it's referring to the day before Pesach, which is the day of Korban Pesach, and also we have the pasuk lo tishchat dam zivhi. You would think that it might mean from Leil Yud Dalet, it's asur already to have chametz in your possession. But the fact is, it says ach bayom what does it say? Ach bayom harishon tashbithu, and it says ach. So from this one, it has to be bayom. So we understand that at some point during this day, Yod Daled, Hametz becomes Asur. And Rashi tells you, the rest of this halacha is Lanu, the Chachamim, the Nevi'im, the Chachamim. Me'ata, we learn from the Torah, Miksaf Hayom Mutar, Miksaf Asur, Me'ata yesh lanu lahalek hasyo le'isur, wa hasyo le'heter. In other words, the Torah Shabbat is the result of the meeting, of the conjunction, as it were, of the Torah Shebichtav and Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael receives the Torah and learns from the Torah and infers from the Torah all kinds of things. And something such as this, which is based explicitly and directly on the Lashon of the Katuv, Ach b'yom harishon tashbithu, this is understood to be a Isur Torah l'chol davar. So if you look up in the Rambam, look up anywhere, any of the Posikim, any of the Moneh Miswot, it's Asur min Torah to have Chametz tahirat she'ah shvi'it, from midday on Yod Daled b'Nisan. But that demarcation line, according to Rashi at least, was inferred and formulated by Am Yisrael, by the Mekablei Torah. In other words, Torah She'Ba'al Peh is the result, is what happens when Am Yisrael meets and the Torah meet. That's what Rashi is saying. Something very, very profound and very powerful, in my view. Something which you would not learn or understand from what Rambam says. Does that mean that we can say categorically Rambam disagrees with Rashi? I'm not sure about that at all. In fact, I would tend to think that Rambam probably thought exactly like Rashi. But Rambam tends, like Rav Sa'id Dagon also, perhaps because of the fight and quarrel and vikuach with the Karaim at that time, they didn't want to debate with the Karaim. They wanted to say, this is the halacha, kach kibalnu, yesh lanu kabbalah. We have a tradition, this is the accepted parshanut, the accepted interpretation of this pasuk, and we don't want to discuss it with you any further. Because once you begin arguing, there's no end to the argument, because, as we know, people who have an agenda or people who don't want to agree, they won't agree. So, I'm not sure that Rambam really thought differently, but if you read only what Rambam says in his Pirush on the Mishnah, then you don't hear what Rashi says. Rashi says something I think very, very profound, that Torah She'Ba'al Peh, even such a very major and unanimously agreed upon halacha as Hametz being Asur from Chasot Hayom Yud Daled, is not mufurash in the Torah, even though it's considered min Torah legamrei. It is the inference and the understanding of the Torah that Am Yisrael arrived at, based on iyun b'ketuvim and midot she'atana yudeshet b'hen, etc. And that is the result, and that I think is a very true and accurate and profoundly enlightening understanding of the true essence and nature of the Torah She'Ba'al Peh, which I fear many people do not fully appreciate. Time marches on, so I will end with the following. Last time we met, we spoke about Purim, and we spoke about Mihayav Inesh Le'besumeh B'Puraya, the requirement to Basem B'Yain. And I tried to explain, I hope I was successful, that the term Libasumeh means Lehith Basem, which means to be affected positively and to be raised to a higher level of understanding and perception by drinking a moderate amount of alcohol, not getting drunk. I explained that the shoresh in Aramaic for being drunk is Rui, Resh, well, Yod. So if Rabbah meant to say that you must get drunk on Purim, then he would have said Mihayav Inesh Lirvuye Bepuraya. But he doesn't say, he says Libas Someh. What I tried to explain last time, and it's also relevant I think to Leila Seder, because in Leila Seder we have a mitzvah of drinking 4 cups of wine, which is not a totally insignificant amount of wine. Even if this is the amount, which it is, even a bit more than a revi'it, and you don't have to drink the whole revi'it, so you don't have to drink a lot of wine, but nevertheless you're drinking wine. I think that which Rabbah says with regards to Purim is also true is not only true on Purim. Rabbah's statements are general statements, and I tried to explain this last time, and I'm not sure that I did a satisfactory job, so I want to quote more precisely and correctly a few things that I may have mentioned last time and add a few other things. And as I'm saying, this is relevant also to Leila Seder, because Leila Seder is a very important night, perhaps the most important night of the year. It is the basis of our identity as Am Hashem, Am B'nai Yisrael, as we are mentioned, as we are termed, defined in Sefer Shemot. It is the night when we remind ourselves who we are and why we are. Some of you may recall the campaign or may have seen posters and materials to do with the campaign in the late 60s, early 70s, Leminyanam, to free Soviet Jewry. So some of the posters that I recall from that period, for example, posters and books and things that appeared in magazines that I remember, they would say, Shalach et Ami. Pasuk straight out of Sefer Shemot, Perek Tet, Shalach et Ami. Very true. 3 very important words right out of the Torah. No argument. But whoever made that poster or quoted that slogan forgot to mention the word that immediately follows, which is وَيَعْبُدُونِ. Shalach et Ami وَيَعْبُدُونِ. The purpose of Am Yisrael leaving Mitzrayim was to become Avdei Hashem. Avdei Hashem, u'lo Avdei Hashverosh, u'lo Avdei Paro, u'lo Avdei Hayoamashit. Yimach Shema wa Zichra, Ela Avdei Hashem. That is the purpose of being Jewish. That is the purpose of Am Hashem ba'olam hazeh, and that is why we left Mitzrayim. And yet, when you think about how we got to Mitzrayim, and how long we were in Mitzrayim, and how much we suffered in Mitzrayim, it would be not unreasonable to ask yourself the question, why did this historical process, which Hashem clearly set in motion, beginning with Yosef being taken to Mitzrayim, as the Midrash says explicitly, that Hashem really wanted, Hashem's aim, and that's what Sefer Bereshit is telling you. Much of Sefer Bereshit is devoted to explaining this point, that Hashem wanted to take Beit Yaakov to Mitzrayim, in order that they should be there for a time and be Meshu'abadim and be enslaved and suffer there, and that they eventually should leave and eventually receive the Torah and eventually return to Eretz Yisrael. That was the great plan. And it begins with Yosef, with the Ra'av. There's a Ra'av. Yosef gets to Mitzrayim. There's a Ra'av in Eretz Canaan. There's a famine. They go down to Mitzrayim to buy food, etc. This was all a way of getting Beth Yaakov to Mitzrayim. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone there. Keep in mind that Yaakov's father, Yitzhak, was told Mufurash by Hashem, Gur ba'aretz hazov, don't go to Mitzrayim. Stay here. Yaakov would have been normal and reasonable to expect that he would do the same. My father was told not to leave, I'm not leaving. But Hashem forced him to go to Mitzrayim. How did he force him? The Midrash states that just as when there is a cow that we wish to take to a certain spot, either to be slaughtered or we just needed to move it over somewhere over there, and it refuses to budge, if you take the calf of the mother and you lead it over there, well, the mother will follow instinct, and she'll go where the calf goes. Thus it was with Yosef and Yaakov. Yosef was the calf taken down to Mitzrayim, and Yaakov followed naturally. In other words, it's an analogy, but the idea is clear. But But you might ask yourself, was it necessary to bring about these events in such a manner that Yosef would have to be in jail and suffer, and then the Jewish people would have to be in Mitzrayim and suffer, and couldn't it have been done some other way? Well, it's not for us to say, because we don't run the world. We don't understand how the world is run. Only Hashem understands that. And this is the same point that we made with regards to Purim. The Nes of Purim, the Hatzalah of Purim, the salvation was very great and miraculous and unexpected. But look at how it came about. This young Jewish maiden, Esther, spent her almost her entire life sleeping in the bed of Ahashverosh, Agoy, Ha'arel, Ha'kesil, Ha'rasha. That's a tragic story regarding any young Jewish maiden, correct? And yet that's how Hashem deliberately brought about this Yeshua and this Nes, which we celebrate to this day, which we shall celebrate for all time, as Yerushalmi stresses in Masechet Mechila, as Rambam quotes at the end of Hilchot Mechila. And you might ask yourself here again, why is it necessary to happen in such a way? Couldn't Hashem bring such a thing about in a different manner, somewhat more user-friendly, so to speak? The answer is that we can't answer such a question, but we can begin to understand that we don't understand, that we have to accept Hashem's hashgacha, the way Hashem runs the world. We don't understand why it has to be that way always. Usually we don't understand. Maybe much later, with hindsight, we understand certain things. At the time, we usually don't understand at all. In the case of Esther and Purim, it became apparent quite quickly, actually, within several years, shall we say, a number of years. But normally we don't really understand. We can't explain. But we have to accept Hashem's hashgacha ba'olam. We have to understand that even those things that strike us as evil or bad or unnecessarily harmful or difficult or tragic, that we would prefer they didn't have to be that way. But the fact is, Hashem knows better, and that's how it works. So Purim came about through Esther, and Yetziat Mitzrayim came about through this long series of events that led to the She'ibud in Mitzrayim and the eventual Yetziat Mitzrayim, leaving Mitzrayim. And in Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Ayin that I mentioned last time, Ba'al Peh, it says as follows. It's the same Rabbah who says in Mechila Daf Zayin, Mihayav inash libasumeh b'puraya ad lo yada ben Arur Haman v'Baruch Mordechai, which I understand to mean Arur Haman is a code for everything that's bad, for difficult things, unpleasant things that we would prefer not to have to deal with or know about. It's also implied, by the way, both in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, really, that there were plenty of Jews who didn't think that we should make a big deal out of Purim. We should forget. The less said about it, the better. It's such a tragic and unpleasant story with this business with Esther, so maybe we should just not talk about it too much. But Mordechai and Esther were adamant that it should be, and many of the Chachamim eventually agreed. So it became what we know as Purim. So Arur Haman is code for everything that's unnecessarily difficult or harmful or painful, tragic, and Baruch Mordechai is a code for everything that's good. And this is based on the piyut that they used to sing, as we still have today, such a piyut. Arur Haman, Baruch Mordechai, Baruchim Yisrael, Arurim Oyevim, etc. We know about such piyutim, and they had such piyutim in ancient times as well. And so Rabbah was using that lashon, those piyut, lashonot piyut, those liturgical expressions, phrases, to refer poetically to, and this whole statement is a amira gadit on many levels, to say a person has to reach a point, try to attain a point and a perception where you see that even the evil is part of Hashem's plan. Even though you see it that way now, it may not be in the future. You don't know right now, but you know that it's not what you would have designed or chosen or hoped for, but you have to understand that Hashem works and runs in his own way and runs the world according to his chokhmah. And this is a very high perception to understand such a thing. That's what Rabbah says with regards to Purim. And I'm saying we have to understand the same thing with regards to Pesach and with regards to everything. And in fact, with regards to what's going on today. Look how many things have changed within Am Yisrael over the last 18 months because of a terrible tragedy which was created by evil and foolish people who insisted on adopting asinine and inane concepts and ideas and beliefs, and yet we see there are positive outcomes as well. And as I've said before, I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this war. I think we're maybe not even at the midpoint. So the same Rabbah who says over there, with what he says with regards to Megillah and Purim, he says also, first of all, to prove that Rabbah doesn't think you should get drunk. Rabbah says in Sanhedrin, Al tera yain ki yit adam, al tera yain shaharit odam. In other words, drinking lots of wine can lead to terrible outcomes, such as bloodshed, such as crime, such as anger, such as fighting, who knows. So the same Rabbah says don't get drunk, number one. Number two, Rabbah says over here, the Pasuk says, V'yain yisamach levav enosh. So the Pasuk is written Yod, Sin or Shin, depending how you read it, Mem, Heth, and we read it Yisamach, Yain Yisamach levav enosh. The wine gladdens the heart and makes puts a person into a better mood, a bit different frame of mind. And he says, we read it Yisamach, and he says Zacha mesamaho. If he is Zocher, then drinking wine b'midah nechona, drinking in moderation, mesameach. In other words, it can raise a person up. Lo zacha meshammeho. That's the correct girusah. In the Tfus it says meshammehu, but it's meshamho. Meshammeho means, in other words, instead of sin we read shin, and instead of hey we read heth, we read hey. So instead of mesameho, meshammeho. In other words, it will make you shamem. In other words, and cause you to be niv'ar mida'af and to act like a behemah, be shamem legamre. And then Rabbah says about himself, hamra v'rehani pakahim, that wine and besamim added to my wisdom. So the point I'm making is this lesson of Rabbah, which also we should also connect it to what we find in Masechet Shabbat, Daf Lamed. V'shibachti ani et hasimcha, it says in Kohelet, simcha shel miswa. ולשמחה מה זו עושה, זו שמחה שאינה של המצווה. ללמדך שאין שכינה שורה לא מתוך עסבות ולא מתוך עצלות ולא מתוך שחוק ולא מתוך קלות ראש ולא מתוך שיחה, it goes without saying, לא מתוך שכרות ולא מתוך דברים בטלים, אלא מתוך דבר שמחה של המצווה. And this can also be things like music, as the Gemara brings the pasuk with regards to Elisha. Elisha was displeased that he had to meet Yehoram, Melech HaRasha Shel Yisrael, and he said, I wouldn't even speak to you, I wouldn't look at you if it wasn't for the fact that Yehoshaphat was here. But when he's asked to prophesy, to predict what is about to happen, he says, وَعَتَا كَحُولِ مَنَّجَيْن وَهَيَا كَنَجَيْن هَمَنَّجَيْن وَتَهِي عَلَوْ يَدَ أَدُونَي. In other words, there is a connection between things like wine, alcohol, sweet-smelling substances, music, which can raise a person up spiritually, intellectually. And it says in the Gemara over there, by the way, Amar Rav Yehuda, v'chen lidvar halacha. In other words, partaking in such things moderately can even increase the wisdom and halachic understanding of the chacham. Again, you see, it's clear these kinds of ideas can only be directed at chachamim, because your average person will just see it as license to act like a bur and am haaretz or worse, and lo yetzeh meze shum davar tov. obviously, nothing good will come of it. But to the right kind of person, and it says, "V'chem b'dvar halacha," so who learns halacha? Chachamim. So Rav Yehuda says, music or wine, these can increase a person's understanding and perception in deep spiritual and halachic matters. So this is also something we should keep in mind. Leila Seder is a time to be happy, not to be uptight, not to be concerned that was it a Kazait, was this a Revi'it. I'll tell you a story which I didn't make up, which is written in a book which you can check to make sure I'm not making it up. The name of the book is Makor Baruch. It's a number of volumes written by the Baal Torah Tlima, whose name was Rabbi Baruch Epstein, the son of the Aruch HaShulchan. And there he writes, the book is in many volumes, and there's all manner of discussions and interesting things there. But some of that book, Makor Baruch, is actually a kind of autobiography, where he describes his early years when he was learning in Volozhin. Why is that interesting? Well, first of all, Volozhin was an interesting place. Second of all, it was more interesting for him because the Rosh Yeshiva, the Netziv, his second wife, his first wife passed away, his second wife was his aunt. In other words, the sister of the Aruch HaShulchan. And so he was a young, I'm not sure exactly, a young teenage boy, whatever. And he would go to their house quite frequently during the week, on Shabbat, Chagim. He was there quite a lot. So he knew that he got to know. He went to visit his aunt, who had a soft spot for him, gave him hot meals, etc. And anyhow, usually B'chorei Yeshiva in those days, there was no pnimiyah as such. There was no dormitory. People were billeted out to people's homes. They ate in private homes. And he also got to know the Netziv very well. So he writes, and he also spent Leila Seder at Reb Chaim Brisk's home, who was the other Rosh Yeshiva, who joined the Yeshiva later, but he was also Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin. And he says there was a big difference between the two studying. Reb Chaim Brisk was rather uptight about the Shiur, the Halacha, the Shita, the Rambam, Tosafot. It was a rather tense experience, the way he describes it. Whereas the Netziv was a much more relaxed environment and more sameach. I also saw, which is a lesson to take to heart, I also saw someone who makes Matzah, has been making Matzah for many years, but he wrote about himself. He posted this somewhere, and I saw it. I know this person. He said that it used to be the case when he began first baking Matzah that he was very uptight about the time, the 18 minutes rushing here, right? It was all very, very pressured. And his wife said to him, it's not an unpleasant experience to make matzah with you. It's all so high pressure. Then he began to look more into the halachot and understand that you don't have to be in a rush at all, etc., etc. And then everyone enjoyed making matzah. And the same was true with Leila Seder. It's not a time to be uptight. There's no reason to be pressured or uptight about anything at all, really. It's really quite straightforward. And on all kinds of details, there are many opinions on different things, but the Ikarei Advarim, most of the things are straightforward and simple. And the Ikar is Lismach B'Shem, L'Saper Sipur Yetziat Misraim, to ourselves, to our family, our acquaintances, our friends, our children. And to know who we are and why we are, and that Leila Seder is there to teach us and remind us of that every year. The last word, the name of the Netziv. He writes this in his Perush on the Torah and Parashat Bo. In Hamek Davar, he says, sometimes you may have a father who has a particular lesson that he wishes to impart to his son. And he sits him down and he relates to him the whole thing that he wishes to relate at length. And he says, you understand what you need to do, and be careful not to do this in life and act in this way and behave in that way and don't do that. The son says, yes, Father, I understand. He says, okay, you can go. The next day, he calls him over and he says, Chaim, you remember what I said to you yesterday? He says, yeah, I remember. He says, okay, go. He doesn't tell him the whole thing again. And so he does every day, but once a year he would go over the whole thing again, at length. The Nativ says that is the relationship between Korban Pesach and Leil Seder and the mitzvah of tefillin. At the end of Parashat Bo, talks about the mitzvah of tefillin, also in connection with Korban Pesach. They're mentioned next to each other. And he says Korban Pesach, Leil Seder is like the big lesson, the big speech that you get from your father once a year, to make sure you got the message, you got it clear in your mind, and you won't forget. And every day you wear tefillin, because that is the small brief reminder. Remember what we discussed Leil Seder on Pesach? That's what you have to remember today as well, but a small reminder is enough. So Leil Seder is a very important night. Pesach is a very important hug, and we should, Be'ezrat Hashem, take advantage of it to the maximum, and enjoy Pesach, and נשמח לפני השם מלכנו ונתפלל שנדע להכיר בין, עד שלא נדע, עד לא ידע בין זה לזה, שנשמח בכל ונבין את דרכי השם עד כמה שאפשר. היו ברוכים, שיהיה חג שמח לנו לכל בית ישראל בעזרת השם. אמן ואמן.
What about eating the afikoman before the hasil? That also is a source of type of
לכתחילה יש שיטות בראשונים שלכתחילה you should eat the afikoman before hasot, that is true. בדיעבד ודאי שזה אפשר לאכול אחר כך, אחרי חצות. The hekesh is not such a clear hekesh. It's not so clear, because the mahloket really is with regards to Korban Pesach, whether you have to finish eating the Korban Pesach by Chasot, or you can eat it all the way through the night till Aruch HaShachar. Afikoman is only a zecher Pesach. So even and there's a safek whether the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah or the other chachamim with regards to Zman Achilat Pesach, whether it's like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah or Rabbi Akiva, whether it's all night or only till Chatzot. So even if you're posek like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, you have to complete eating the Pesach, the Basar Pesach by Chatzot. Even if you are posek that way, which is not clear, because there are various Mishnayot which don't agree on this, and as the Rosh, for example, discusses, and Tosafot discusses, even then it's not clear that should apply to Matzah, which is only a Zechel Adavar, which is Vaday B'Vaday Midivrei Sofrim. So it's not Mamash. It's not worth making people in your home, in your family, pressuring them, making them feel uncomfortable. It's not wise or necessary to do so. On the other hand, people tend to fall asleep, children tend to fall asleep, so you should try and get as much of the Seder done before people fall asleep. There's no mitzvah to stay up till all hours.